Welcome to Shift, a college admissions ACT and SAT podcast for a changing world. I'm Tyler, the founder of Achievable, and we have an affordable ACT course that includes everything you need to ace your ACT test. A full textbook, tons of questions backed by our memory-enhancing algorithm, videos on key topics, a built-in study planner, and full-length practice exams. You can get a free trial at achievable.me, and if you like it, the code podcast will get you 10% off at checkout. Now, let's get started. So today we've got Mary Johnson with us from Odyssey College Prep. And Mary, if you could just give us a little quick bit about yourself, that would be great.
Yeah, thanks for having me here. I am Mary, and I've been working for Odyssey College Prep for about 2 years. I mainly teach the verbal sections of the ACT, so basically not science and math. And I really love it. It's been a really good thing. I love seeing students improve and reaching their potential with this. It's an amazing thing.
Yeah, fantastic. And so today we're going to be talking about the ACT writing section and how to get a good score on it. And just to start, right, I think everybody's familiar with the other 4 ACT sections, but the ACT writing section is optional and not everybody takes it, though, there are definitely some colleges that require it. But I would say, it's something that is still a should I or shouldn't I decision for a lot of students. So could you share a little bit more about sort of what the ACT writing section is about?
Yeah, and you're right, some universities or some colleges will require it. Not many do. I'd say it more depends on which college within a university you're applying for. If you're applying for a specific major, they might want to see your writing score. That'll give them a good idea if you're a good fit for them. If you're applying for some sort of English major, some writing thing. But it's going to be the last thing on test day that you do after the 4 sections. You'll sit down for 40 minutes and answer a prompt. And it will give you 3 perspectives to look at. Perspectives on some sort of low-key social issue, usually. The example they give on the ACT website is about intelligent machines. So,
right. So when you say low-key social issue, you mean a social issue that's not like a hot topic.
Exactly. Yep. Low-key meaning, like you could state your opinion and no one would get fuming with you.
Yeah.
So, yeah, they're not going to ask about gun laws or anything. They're just like, oh, should machines be able to replace people's jobs? Right? Is this a good idea? Is this a bad idea? What do you think? Here are 3 different perspectives on the issue. Address these 3 perspectives and tell us what you think. And you get 40 minutes to do that. So not a super long amount of time, but it's enough to form some sort of opinion and prove a point. But that's what you're facing, and it's at the end of the test, so when your fuel tank is nearly on the E, and then they ask you to do that.
Right. And yeah, it's a 40-minute writing section, which 40 minutes is a pretty long time. So what are the expectations for, both sort of like how long the essay should be, and then like what are the other parts of sort of the scoring rubric that you want to highlight here for getting a good score on it?
Yeah, we recommend doing a solid like introduction, 3 body paragraph conclusion essay. So 5 paragraphs, 1 body paragraph addressing each perspective. Is what we like to say. Because in the rubric they'll say like, oh, to what extent did you address the perspectives? So if you just address one of the perspectives, it's like, oh, good, brownie point for you. But even more if you can address all of these things that we're talking about.
Right. And the scoring rubric, just so you all know, is a 1 to a 6, but you get scored by 2 people. So then you get a score that's between 2 and 12 for each of the 4 sections. And so the 4 sections, I'm just going off my notes here, are ideas and analysis, which I think is what you were just talking about, like directly talking about the perspectives, preferably all three of them.
Mm-hmm.
Development and support, which seems to be basically how well can you use evidence or argument to back up whatever your point of view is. Organization, so following the typical, intro, three body paragraph, and conclusion structure. Having things that are about the same topic in the same body paragraph, etc. Having a thesis statement, having and concluding sentences for those paragraphs that match all that. And then language use, which to me seems to be kind of just like, do you use good vocab? Though I'm curious if you disagree with that. But
Yeah,
is that all kind of roughly accurate for like what you're graded on?
yeah. And with language use, yes, that's true. You want to use good vocab. Um, a big part of that also is being concise and being clear in what you're saying instead of
Mm-hmm.
rambling on and giving fluffy nothings in your
Mm-hmm.
paragraph to kind of fill space because you don't know what else to talk about. If you don't know what you're
Yeah.
talking about, then it's going to be clear, right? So you don't need to add fluffy things in there.
Yeah, and you don't need to repeat yourself. I mean, something I see a lot with younger writers that I look at is like they will say something and then they will say it again in the next sentence but like slightly differently. And I feel like this behavior kind of comes out of like what schools require of you, right? Like schools are asking you to write a 5-page essay. The length of an essay does not determine the quality of an essay, but that's how schools are, right? Schools are like, do this large bulk of work. And so when you've got a page essay to write that you could probably realistically write in 2 or 3 pages, you end up writing the same sentence 4 times in a row to fill space, right? Or writing variations on it. So I feel like if you're listening and you're a student, you need to get out of that habit. The rest of the world after school, and unfortunately I know you're going to college, so you're gonna have to deal with this for 4 more years. But as soon as school's over, nobody wants to read 5-page essays anymore. People barely read half-page emails, right? Everything's about being short and concise and to the point and getting and being effective with all those constraints. And so that's where I think yeah, I think for this exercise, back to the ACT writing, because that's what we're talking about. Just making sure that you're like using one one sentence if you can, and trying to like make each sentence have a strong relevant point. Another, like, there should be a point to each sentence. You shouldn't be able to cut a sentence from your essay and have it be like nothing changed. The other piece of it is something, a piece of advice that I heard from someone else, which I think is really interesting, is basically you should always back up your argument in a body paragraph with at least one piece of evidence, right? And so that probably goes more to the development and support category. But it's like for it when you are starting to write this essay, and I think we'll talk about the process here in a little bit, right? Because I'm curious whether you would recommend outlining or not. But when you're getting started with your prep, like, think about a piece of evidence, even if it's just like anecdotal and doesn't have a stat behind it. Think about a piece of evidence to back up each of the arguments that you're trying to make, because that will really help you with the development and support rubric category.
Absolutely. Like, even if the evidence is just one of your own experiences, like, it's been true for me that X, right? Or in my experience, this has been true. Like, that's enough. You have some evidence. Great. There's something behind this. You're not just saying words. So I totally agree.
Mhm. Yeah. And then just to touch on like the last one, organization. Um, would you say that basically just knowing good essay structure, which is, intro paragraph, which has a thesis statement, 3 body paragraphs, each of the body paragraphs has like one distinct thing that it's trying to do. and then a conclusion that includes the thesis again and some other stuff and doesn't include any new evidence. Like, is that basically it? Is it just like write a good 5 paragraph essay, or is there more to it than that?
That's a big part of it. It's a nice base. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I think what's possibly even more important is keeping in mind what your central goal is in writing the essay.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if you keep in mind who you're talking to the whole time, who your audience is, that makes all the difference in the world. I think it
Yeah, so what
was,
do you mean by that?
yeah, like, so let's talk about your audience, who you're talking to, right?
Yeah,
The
who's reading the essay?
right, and this is kind of like stereotypical. Okay, this is not true for everybody. This is just what is mostly like most of the time. This is true. Okay, but most of the people writing or reading your essay, reading your ACT writing thing, are people who this is their part time job, okay, to read your essays. This isn't like a full time thing for them, it's an on the side work.
Right.
So maybe this is somebody who majored in English or writing in college, and maybe they are now having some lower paid job, like a teacher, right? Or maybe they don't
Mm-hmm.
have any other job at all besides this part time gig of reading your essays and scoring them. But it's not the most enjoyable work if you can put yourself in their shoes. You're reading the same response to the same question over and over again with
Mm-hmm.
probably not much variety, and it's all 16-year-old writing, which just
Mm-hmm.
isn't as great, right? It's just the fact. So it's not the most enjoyable work for most. They're probably kind of not happy to be at work, but they're there because it's paying some bills, and that's great. But what
Right.
you can do as a student when you're writing this is keeping them in mind and saying, okay, I can make your job a little less awful. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
If you can engage them somehow into caring about you as a person, right? Painting a picture for them. This is who I am as a student. This is me. Then they can connect with you because they know who you are. Maybe if you told a story about your summer job and how that was for you, you included some characters, their names, they are now attached to you, to your story, to the people that you love. That makes it more
Mm-hmm.
enjoyable for them and more invested in your writing, in your story. And that always helps.
Right. Well, making it stand out from the other essays, right? And I think one of the pieces of advice that I really like was like um using names, right, to like attach some significance to like kind of the story that you're putting together, and then using, like you said, personal anecdotes or other things that just are in general like gonna make it just more interesting. I think at the end of the day, it's like trying to get them at least as excited about reading this as you would hope that a college admissions essay reviewer would be excited about reading your admissions essay, right? It's a lot of the same advice. It's like have a good hook, you know, tell like a unique and personable story. Yeah. So I mean, obviously, there's only so much you can do if you're talking about like intelligent machines. But maybe instead of the starting point for that prompt being like, well, let's talk about like what happens when AI takes over the world and whatever. You could start with, well, my experience with an intelligent machine is when my Alexa accidentally ordered us 300 socks because it overheard my mom wrong one day, right? And it's like, and then you tell this story with that perspective about like from there there's a lot of directions you can go argumentatively. You could argue that intelligent machines are not that smart. You could argue that they have a long way to go. You could argue that they're cheeky and endearing but actually helpful, but have some quirks and bugs along the way in the short term. Like, but it's a much more interesting way to start your story off than just kind of going right into the argument.
Definitely. And also, no one can really argue with a story that you tell them, right? Like,
Right, like for instance, your Alexa didn't have to order 300 socks for you to make the story.
yeah,
Like maybe don't blatantly lie because I don't know, it's like it's a lot harder to keep that straight when you're writing and you also if you were like, my Alexa got, helped me by giving me my entire physics exam answers, like, well, I don't think
right.
that's true, and then like the reviewer is going to respond like more negatively to that, right? But I think if you are maybe playing things up a little bit to be cute, or if you have like a cute example in your head, I think it's okay. At the end of the day, the point of the essay is not to grade a nonfiction, it's to grade your ability to make an argument.
Totally. Yes. And I absolutely agree with you. Like, some little non truths, sure, I don't think they'd be angry with you because I don't think they're grading you on what's true and what's false. But yeah, I think they can sense authenticity. If it's totally off, then that's just kind of
Yeah.
hard to make real.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so great. I mean, I think those are all good tips, right? Knowing your audience. I think maybe just for the essay structure, I think we already talked about kind of all the typical things that you want to do. In the intro, you want to have a hook, you want to establish credibility and then post a thesis. In the body paragraphs, you want to have basically like a beginning and ending sentence that bookend it, and then you want to have some kind of argument and you want to have evidence supporting that argument. And maybe if you're feeling spicy, you also want to have a counter argument that you address and then also uh, like fix, for lack of a better word.
And that's
And then the
so powerful,
conclusion.
by the way. It's like in the
Yeah,
rubric,
yeah, tell me more about
technically,
that.
you can't get, well, it's basically almost nobody can get a perfect score. So don't get your hopes like
Hmm.
too high on that. Never seen a perfect score. Super hard. I haven't even heard of a perfect score ever, like in real life.
Hmm.
But you cannot even get close to that if you don't have a counter argument. So even if it's like some weak little thing, it'll get you some points because it's in the rubric. It's like, oh, your use of counter arguments.
Right.
Okay, that must be there. Obviously, if you can't think of anything on the spot, it's taking up too much time. Okay, that's fine. You don't have to put it. But anything you can think of, that is points. That's money. So I would do that.
Yeah. Yeah, and it also shows that you're not just blindly making your argument and just kind of steamrolling past any other thoughts around it, right? Like most things have two sides to them. Um, so then let's talk about like approach. So when you've got your essay in front of you and you got 40 minutes, do you allocate any time to like prep work and setting up the structure of the essay? And then if so, what do you recommend?
Honestly, I think the framework of the essay is laid out when you're writing the intro. So
Hmm.
I would just get writing. Um, for a 5 paragraph thing, you're right, 40 minutes is a while, but when it comes to 5 paragraphs, I mean, and if you're a
Hmm.
perfectionistic person, then goodness, that's like no time at all. So, the intro nicely lays out, like, okay, here's a hook, yeah, your statement of things, giving some examples, and your thesis really should lay out what you're going to talk about and your whole point of things. Maybe you could lay a little
Hmm.
framework for examples or evidences that you're going to use in your body paragraphs, but
Hmm.
I feel like that can be done after you create a thesis, right? Because that should be the statement to rule everything. It's your focus of everything you're
Right.
talking about.
Well, and the thesis is basically your three paragraph topics. So that it should be your whole essay, more or less.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I
Yeah.
mean, maybe you could start with thinking about a thesis first and then getting started on the introduction. But I feel that most people, when they read the perspectives already know, like, ooh, I want that one. I feel this way. I can have a good argument for this. So they already really know what the thesis
Right.
is. It's just getting started. It's the hardest part about writing, like,
Right.
put something on the page.
Yeah, and I think that's also some advice that I've heard from a lot of people, even for like other tests that involve writing, is you should really like to practice for this, just practice writing a lot. Because I think the biggest problem that a lot of people have is that they are not used to writing for 40 minutes straight. They're not used to writing like a 5 paragraph essay straight either. And all else equal, and this is for, this is true more for like tests that are machine learning graded than these, which are still human graded, but that might change. But all else equal, a longer essay that's equally good to a slightly shorter essay will get a little bit better of a score. And so it's like you want, on the one hand, I told you don't have waste or filler sentences, and that's still true. But on the other hand, you don't want to have an essay with a 2 sentence conclusion either because you ran out of time, right? So like just keep writing, keep kind of plowing away. And if you do kind of wrap up the essay and you have extra time, maybe even consider going back and like trying to see if there's additional evidence you can add or an additional counter argument that you can address in one of your body paragraphs or something like that. I mean, other than that, is there anything else that you would recommend people do with the extra time if they've got kind of an extra minute or two on there?
Yeah, I agree with all those things. I would say double checking your work, right? Like, did I address the perspectives? If I have a counter
Mm-hmm.
argument, did I put it in somewhere, right? Making sure you're fulfilling those rubric requirements. Yeah, and getting rid of filler words because it's not enjoyable to read those. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and in filler sentences. Great. Well, then, is there anything else that you want to talk about here as we wrap up kind of the ACT writing advice?
I think we've said it. Those are good things.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. This has been Shift, a college admissions podcast for a changing world, hosted by Tyler from Achievable with Mary Johnson from Odyssey College Prep. And you can get a free trial of our ACT course for free by going to achievable.me and use the code podcast if you like it to get 10% off at checkout.